All right. So are you ready to like really get into it today? You guys have sent in some wild research about how anxiety actually works. And, oh, well, we're going to try to make sense of it all.
Yeah, it really is amazing, how much we're learning about the brain these days and, what we can actually do about anxiety.
Totally. And we're mainly focused on Rewire Your Anxious Brain by Catherine Pittman and Elizabeth Karle.
Great book.
Yeah, it's a really good one. They go super in depth on the neuroscience, but like in a way that, anyone can understand. So think of this deep dive as your cheat sheet to understanding like the core ideas.
Yeah, like kind of your spark notes.
Exactly.
So like the authors, they break down how anxiety isn't just a feeling, it's a real physical process. And it often comes from like two main pathways in the brain.
Oh,
They call them the cortex pathway and the amygdala pathway.
two pathways, two different ways our brains can like, trigger those anxious feelings.
Oh, wait.
So let's like break it down, starting with the cortex. That's the part of the brain that's always thinking, analyzing, overthinking.
Yeah, like the cortex is constantly running like simulations, trying to predict what could go wrong. And, that's where those what if spirals start, those loops of rumination.
Oh my gosh, yes. It's like my brain turns into a movie director, making all these worst case scenario movies.
Yeah.
The book is a really good example, like those parents who imagine like a car crash every time their teenager is 5 minutes late.
Right. And it's not like the cortex is like trying to stress us out on purpose. It's trying to protect us, right, by like anticipating potential threats. But sometimes it just gets a little carried away.
Okay, yeah, that makes sense.
Yeah.
So then we have the amygdala. That's more like the emotional, reactive part of the brain, right? It's like
Yeah.
our internal alarm system ready to go off at a moment's notice.
Think of it like that friend who like jumps at the slightest noise, constantly on edge, scanning for danger, and it doesn't like always wait for the cortex to analyze the situation, before reacting.
Oh, that explains why sometimes I feel my heart racing, like way before I even realize what's making me anxious.
Yeah.
It's like my body's reacting before my mind has caught up.
Exactly. And it's those physical sensations that can make anxiety feel so overwhelming. Like our body is speaking a language that our mind doesn't understand.
Okay, so we have the cortex, the thoughtful planner, and the amygdala, the impulsive reactor.
Mm.
But they don't operate like separately, do they?
No, no, they're constantly like, interacting,
Yeah.
sending signals back and forth, creating that whole, experience we call anxiety.
Okay, so two pathways, two different ways our brains create anxiety. But here's where it gets really cool. The book dives into the actual neuroscience of anxiety, like the specific brain structures involved.
Right, and understanding these structures can help us, manage it more effectively. Let's start with the cortex. So it's responsible for processing sensory information, memories, and thoughts. But sometimes it can misinterpret like safe sensations as threats.
Like that example of someone with social anxiety who like sees a neutral facial expression and just assumes it's disapproval.
Exactly, right. Their cortex is like sending those danger signals even though, there's no real threat.
Now the amygdala, that's like the threat detector, right? It triggers the stress response. But here's the thing that like really blew my mind. It also forms emotional memories
Yeah.
that can trigger anxiety in the future, even without a conscious trigger.
Right. Those emotional memories are like incredibly powerful, especially, when they're rooted in past experiences. Like the book talks about how someone who was like bitten by a dog as a child might still be afraid of dogs years later, even if they don't consciously remember the actual incident.
Wow.
That fear is triggered by like the emotional memory stored in the amygdala.
Wow. So it's not even like you're thinking about it. It's just like there.
Right.
That really highlights how complex anxiety is. It's not just our current thoughts, it's those past experiences still, like shaping our responses today.
Totally. But here's the good news, right? Our brains are capable of change. You know what it's called?
Why?
Neuroplasticity. And it's like the brain's superpower.
I love that term, neuroplasticity. It's
Yeah.
like the brain is constantly evolving, adapting, rewiring itself based on our experiences.
Yeah, precisely. And the book gives these like really amazing examples of, stroke patients who relearn how to move their limbs or people who are blind developing like heightened senses of hearing and touch. It shows that even after like a major trauma or change, the brain can find new pathways and create new connections.
So if those kinds of changes are possible, rewiring our brains to respond differently to anxiety
Mm.
seems, possible too.
Right.
But how do we like actually do it? Where do we even start?
Well, the first step, according to the book, is understanding, our triggers. These can be external, like, certain places, certain situations, or they can be internal, physical sensations, thoughts, memories.
So someone might get anxious in, crowded places because of an external trigger, but another person might get anxious when their heart starts racing because it triggers a fear of having a panic attack, so that's internal.
Right, right.
Identifying those triggers seems like a crucial first step towards like taking back control.
Absolutely. Once we know like what sets off those anxiety responses, then we can start using specific strategies to, manage them. And the book outlines various strategies. Each one targets either the amygdala or the cortex.
So it's like we're learning to speak the language of both parts of the brain,
Yeah,
figuring out how to calm the amygdala and retrain the cortex.
exactly. So for example, like relaxation techniques like slow deep breathing and muscle relaxation, they can actually calm the amygdala and reduce anxiety.
So it's like sending a chill out signal directly to that alarm system. I love that the book even provides like instructions for diaphragmatic breathing, that deep belly breathing. It's not just about taking like deep breaths. It's about activating that specific breathing pattern.
Yeah, and what's really interesting about that diaphragmatic breathing is that it activates the parasympathetic nervous system, which is, responsible for rest and relaxation.
Oh, okay.
So it's like flipping a switch in your brain from that fight or flight mode to a calmer, more balanced state.
It's amazing how something as simple as breathing can like have such a profound impact. It's like we're tapping into that mind-body connection, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
But calming the amygdala is just one part of it, right? What about those like anxiety-provoking thoughts that come from the cortex?
Right. Well, that's where cognitive restructuring comes in. It's about identifying those negative thought patterns and challenging like their validity.
So it's like saying to your brain like, "Hey, are you sure about this? Is this thought really helpful? Or are you just being kind of dramatic?" It's like taking a step back and questioning those automatic thought patterns.
Exactly. The book gives some really good examples of common anxiety igniting thoughts like catastrophizing
Oh yeah.
or perfectionism, and it gives you like the tools to recognize them and replace them with more realistic supportive ones. The book calls these coping thoughts.
Coping thoughts, I like that. It's like having a mental toolbox filled with positive affirmations and realistic assessments that we can use to counter those negative thoughts.
Totally. And
Right.
the more we practice using them, the more automatic they become, right? It's about rewiring those neural pathways.
So it's like creating a new mental habit,
It,
a more balanced and resilient way of thinking. I'm starting to see how this cognitive restructuring can be such a powerful tool.
yeah.
But what about mindfulness? How does the book explain mindfulness, in a way that makes it feel less abstract and more practical?
Well, the book describes mindfulness as paying attention to the present moment without judgment. It's about noticing those thoughts and feelings, acknowledging them, but not letting them like, control your reactions. It's like watching clouds drift by. You see them, you acknowledge them, but you don't try to grab onto them or push them away.
Oh, I like that. Yeah, it's like creating that space, that mental space between the thought and the reaction,
You're right.
allowing those thoughts to come and go without like dictating our emotional state.
Exactly. And the book emphasizes that, mindfulness isn't about achieving some, perfect state of Zen-like calm. It's about, noticing those thoughts and feelings without judging yourself and gently guiding yourself back to that state of, presence when your mind inevitably wanders.
Okay, so cognitive restructuring is about challenging those thoughts, and mindfulness is about observing them without judgment. They seem like kind of like complementary approaches.
They are. Cognitive restructuring helps us create more balanced and realistic thoughts, while mindfulness helps us, detach from those thoughts.
So it's like we're managing our thoughts from like both ends of the spectrum,
Right.
challenging the content and changing our relationship to them.
Exactly. And the book provides like several techniques for practicing mindfulness, including, meditation, which can be a really powerful way to cultivate that state of awareness and non-judgmental observation.
Meditation is one of those things I've always been curious about, but I've also always felt kind of intimidated by it. It seems like you need like, special training or something.
Not necessarily. The book offers like a really simple breath-focused meditation that anyone can do.
Yep.
It involves bringing your attention to your breath, noticing the sensations of each, inhale and exhale, and gently redirecting your focus back to your breath whenever your mind, starts to wander.
It sounds so simple, but I'm surprised that something so basic could like have such profound effects.
Well, the power of meditation really lies in its simplicity. By focusing on, something as basic as our breath, we're training our minds to stay present, become more aware of those wandering thoughts and gently guide ourselves back to that state of calm.
It's like creating a mental anchor, like something to ground us in the present moment.
Exactly. And the book emphasizes that, consistency is key. Even just a few minutes of meditation each day can make a real difference over time.
It's like building any new habit. It takes time and repetition for those new neural pathways to like become ingrained. Speaking of building habits, the book also talks about lifestyle choices that can impact, our anxiety levels.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. Things like, regular exercise, good sleep hygiene, and even, stress management techniques like yoga or spending time in nature.
It makes sense that taking care of our physical health would also benefit our mental health. It's like we're creating a more resilient foundation, making ourselves less susceptible to anxiety in the first place.
Totally. And the book reminds us that managing anxiety is an ongoing process. It's not about achieving some, perfect state of calm. It's about developing those skills and habits that allow us to navigate, life's inevitable challenges in a more balanced and adaptive way.
Okay, we've talked a lot about like the different rewiring strategies for managing anxiety, but the book also mentions a technique called interoceptive exposure.
Mm-hmm.
Can you explain what that is and how it fits into this whole rewiring process?
Yeah, so interoceptive exposure is a specific type of exposure therapy that focuses on like the physical sensations of anxiety. It's about intentionally triggering those bodily sensations in a safe, controlled environment so you can become more familiar with them.
So instead of avoiding those sensations, which can actually make them worse, we're kind of confronting them head on.
Exactly.
It's like saying, okay, I feel my heart racing, but I'm not going to freak out. I'm just going to ride this wave.
Yeah, yeah. The book explains that interoceptive exposure can be really helpful for people who, have panic attacks or have a fear of those physical sensations themselves.
Yeah, I can see how that'd be helpful if someone has a panic attack, and feels their heart pounding and their chest tightening. They might start avoiding exercise or any, activity that could trigger those same sensations.
Right. And that avoidance, while it makes sense, can actually like perpetuate that cycle of fear. Interoceptive exposure is about breaking that cycle by intentionally inducing those sensations in a safe environment.
So what are some like examples of interoceptive exposure exercises?
The book suggests things like, hyperventilation, spinning in a chair, even, vigorous exercise.
Oh, wow.
Activities that, can safely mimic those physical sensations of anxiety.
It sounds kind of intense, but I can see how it could help that, desensitize those reactions.
Right.
It's like teaching our brains that those sensations aren't dangerous, even if they feel uncomfortable.
Exactly. It's about retraining our brains to recognize those sensations as like a normal part of the body's stress response rather than like a sign of impending doom.
The book also emphasizes the importance of like incorporating relaxation techniques and coping thoughts into those um, interoceptive exposure exercises, right? It's like we're addressing anxiety on both the physical and the mental levels.
Right, exactly. We're using those amygdala-based strategies to calm the body's reactions and those cortex-based strategies to reframe those negative interpretations.
It's like we're learning to be the conductors of our own minds,
Yeah.
orchestrating those different parts of the brain.
Yeah, that's a great way to put it. We're not just, passively experiencing anxiety. We're actively engaging with it, understanding its roots, and developing the skills to manage it.
This entire concept of rewiring our brains is so empowering. It's like we're not stuck with those automatic responses. We have the power to change, to
Yeah.
create new neural pathways that lead to like calmer, more balanced reactions.
It's a reminder that we have more control than we often realize, And I think that's a hopeful message, especially for anyone who's, struggling with anxiety. You're not powerless. Your brain is capable of change, and you can rewire those responses and create a more fulfilling life.
I mean, it sounds intense, but incredibly like empowering.
It is.
It's like you're taking back control from those fears that have been like, holding you back.
Totally. Yeah, but it's important to like approach it carefully and ideally, with a therapist,
Right.
they can help you, like, tailor the exposure to your specific needs, help you, get through those tough moments.
That makes sense. This whole idea of rewiring our brains is fascinating. But is there like ever a point when we've successfully rewired, or is it just like an ongoing process?
That's a great question. And honestly, it's probably a bit of both. Like the book emphasizes that anxiety is a normal human emotion, and the goal isn't to like eliminate it completely.
So it's not about becoming like fearless. It's about learning to like, you know, coexist with those anxious feelings and still live a full life.
Exactly. It's about, shifting our relationship with anxiety, learning to manage it so it doesn't like, control us. Think of it like learning to surf.
Yeah.
You're not trying to stop the waves, you're trying to ride them skillfully.
I love that analogy. Makes me
Oh,
think about how often I've tried to like suppress or ignore my anxiety only to have it like come back even stronger, you
yeah.
know? Maybe it's more about, learning to ride those waves, acknowledging those feelings without letting them dictate my actions.
Yeah, that's a great way to think about it. And, these rewiring strategies that we're talking about can help you, develop those skills.
Okay, so we've talked about those strategies for calming the amygdala and retraining the cortex,
Yeah.
but are there like certain types of anxieties that are more receptive to this rewiring than others?
That's an interesting question. From what I've gathered from the book, anxieties stemming from specific triggers, like phobias, they often respond like really well to exposure therapy. Remember, the amygdala learns through association, so if we can create like new positive associations with those triggers, we can actually change those, fear-based responses.
So it's like teaching the amygdala that, the trigger isn't actually dangerous by like repeatedly exposing it to that trigger in a safe environment.
Right.
But what about those like more generalized anxieties, the ones that aren't tied to a specific, trigger, but just kind of like linger in the background?
Those can be a little trickier. For those, a multifaceted approach might be needed, incorporating a variety of those um, cortex-based and amygdala-based strategies that we've been talking about.
So it's like creating a personalized anxiety management toolkit,
Yeah.
drawing on different tools depending on, the situation.
Exactly. Sometimes, you might need that deep breathing to calm the amygdala. Other times, you might need to use cognitive restructuring to challenge those negative thoughts. And sometimes you might need, a combination of both.
Yeah, I love that. It's not a one size fits all. It's about, finding those strategies that work for you and using them as needed.
Exactly. And it's important to remember that, rewiring those responses takes time and effort.
Right.
It's not a quick fix. It's an ongoing process of learning about, your own brain and developing those skills to manage anxiety.
Okay, I want to like dive a little deeper into those rewiring strategies. We've talked about how the amygdala learns through experience, through association, but what about the cortex? How can we use those cortex-based strategies to like manage those anxiety-provoking thoughts?
Well, the cortex, like we said, is our thinking brain, and it's where those negative thought patterns often, take root. The book focuses on two key strategies for retraining the cortex: cognitive restructuring and mindfulness.
We touched on those a little bit earlier, but I'm ready to like really unpack them. Let's start with cognitive restructuring.
Right.
How does the book like explain that in a way that makes it feel, actionable?
Well, the book describes it as identifying those negative thoughts and then, challenging their validity. It's like becoming a detective, examining the evidence and creating a more balanced, realistic perspective.
So, for example,
Yeah.
if your brain is telling you, I'm going to fail this presentation, you can use cognitive restructuring to say, like, wait a minute, is that really true? Have I ever actually like completely bombed a presentation?
Yeah.
What's a more, realistic outcome?
Exactly. It's about questioning those automatic thoughts and replacing them with more, supportive, empowering beliefs. The book calls these coping thoughts.
Coping thoughts. I like that. It's like having a mental toolbox, right?
Yeah.
Filled with positive affirmations and realistic assessment that we can use to counter those negative thoughts.
Totally. And the more we practice using them, the more automatic they become. It's about rewiring those neural pathways.
So it's like creating a new mental habit,
Exactly.
a more balanced and resilient way of thinking. I'm starting to see how cognitive restructuring can be such a powerful tool for for managing those thoughts. But what about mindfulness? How does the book explain that in a way that makes it feel less, abstract and more practical?
The book describes mindfulness as paying attention to the present moment without judgment. It's about noticing those thoughts and feelings, acknowledging them, but not letting them control your reactions. It's like watching clouds drift by. You see them, you acknowledge them, but you don't try to grab onto them or push them away.
Yeah, I like that. It's like creating that space, that mental space between the thought and the reaction,
Right.
allowing those thoughts to come and go without, dictating our emotional state.
Exactly. And the book emphasizes that, mindfulness isn't about achieving some, perfect state of Zen-like calm. It's about, noticing those thoughts and feelings without judging yourself and gently guiding yourself back to that state of, presence when your mind inevitably wanders.
Okay, so cognitive restructuring is about challenging those thoughts, and
Yeah.
mindfulness is about like observing them without judgment.
Right.
They seem like kind of complementary approaches.
They are. Cognitive restructuring helps us create more balanced and realistic thoughts,
Hmm.
while mindfulness helps us, detach from those thoughts, prevent them from controlling our reactions.
So it's like we're managing our thoughts from like both ends of the spectrum,
Right.
challenging the content and changing our relationship to them.
Exactly. And the book provides several techniques for practicing mindfulness, including, meditation, which can be a really powerful way to cultivate that state of awareness and non-judgmental observation.
Yeah, meditation is one of those things that I've, always been curious about, but I've always also felt kind of intimidated by.
Yeah.
It seems like, you need special training or something.
Not necessarily. The book actually offers a really simple breath-focused meditation that anyone can do.
Okay.
It involves bringing your attention to your breath, noticing the sensations of each, inhale and exhale, and gently redirecting your focus back to your breath whenever your mind, wanders.
Oh, wow, that sounds so simple. I'm surprised that something so basic could have like such profound effects.
Well, the power of meditation lies in its simplicity. By focusing on, something as basic as our breath, we're training our minds to stay present, to become more aware of those wandering thoughts and to gently guide ourselves back to that state of calm.
It's like creating a mental anchor,
Yeah,
something to ground us in the present moment when those thoughts start to spiral.
exactly. And the book emphasizes that, consistency is key. Even just a few minutes of meditation each day can make a big difference over time.
Yeah, it's like building any new habit, it
Yeah.
takes time and repetition. Speaking of building habits, the book also talks about lifestyle choices that can impact, our anxiety levels.
Oh, absolutely. Things like, regular exercise, good sleep hygiene, and even, stress management techniques like yoga or spending time in nature.
Yeah, it makes sense that taking care of our physical health would also like, benefit our mental health. It's like we're
Yeah.
creating a more resilient foundation for ourselves.
Totally. And the book reminds us that managing anxiety is an ongoing process. It's not about achieving some, perfect state of calm. It's about developing those skills and habits that allow us to, navigate life's inevitable challenges in a more balanced and adaptive way.
Okay, we've talked a lot about like the different rewiring strategies for managing anxiety, but the book also mentions a technique called interoceptive exposure.
Uh-huh.
Can you explain what that is and how it like fits into this whole rewiring process?
Yeah, so interoceptive exposure is a specific type of exposure therapy that focuses on the physical sensations of anxiety. It's about intentionally triggering those bodily sensations in a safe, controlled environment so you can become more familiar with them and reduce their power to provoke fear.
So instead of avoiding those sensations, which can actually make them like worse,
Yeah.
we're confronting them head on.
Exactly.
It's like saying, okay, I feel my heart racing, but I'm not going to freak out. I'm just going to, ride this wave.
Exactly. The book explains that interoceptive exposure can be particularly helpful for people who, experience panic attacks or have a fear of those physical sensations themselves.
I can see how that would be helpful. If
Yeah.
someone has a panic attack, and feels their heart pounding and their chest tightening, they might start avoiding exercise or, any activity that could trigger those same sensations.
Right, right. And that avoidance, while it makes sense, it can actually perpetuate that cycle of fear. Interoceptive exposure is about breaking that cycle by intentionally inducing those sensations in a safe environment, allowing the person to experience them without the fear of a full-blown panic attack.
So what are some, like, examples of interoceptive exposure exercises?
Um, the book suggests things like, hyperventilation, spinning in a chair, or even, vigorous exercise, activities that can, safely mimic those physical sensations of anxiety.
It sounds a bit intense, but I can see how it could help, desensitize those reactions. So it's like,
Right.
teaching our brains that those sensations aren't inherently dangerous, even if they feel uncomfortable.
Exactly. It's about retraining our brains to recognize those sensations as a normal part of, the body's stress response rather than like a sign of impending doom.
The book also emphasizes the importance of, like, incorporating relaxation techniques and coping thoughts into those interoceptive exposure exercises,
Yeah.
right? It's
Yeah.
like we're addressing anxiety on both a physical and mental level.
Absolutely. We're using those amygdala-based strategies to calm the body's reactions and those cortex-based strategies to reframe those negative interpretations.
It's like we're learning to be the conductors of our own minds,
Yeah.
orchestrating those different parts of the brain to work together in harmony.
That's a great way to put it. We're not just, passively experiencing anxiety. We're actively experiencing anxiety. We're actively engaging with it, understanding its roots, and developing the skills to manage it effectively.
This entire concept of, like, rewiring our brains is so empowering. It's like we're we're not stuck with those automatic responses. We have the power to change, to create new neural pathways that lead to, like, calmer, more balanced reactions.
It's a reminder that we have more control than we often realize, and I think that's a really hopeful message, especially for anyone who's, struggling with anxiety. You're not powerless. Your brain is capable of change, and you can rewire those responses and create a more fulfilling life.
I think that's, like, a really important point. It's about realizing that we do have the power to, change those responses. It's not about being, completely fearless. It's about learning those skills to manage it.
Exactly. It's like learning any new skill. It takes practice, it takes patience.
Yeah.
But with, consistent effort, we can rewire those neural pathways.
As we've been talking, I keep thinking back to that idea from the book that, courage isn't the absence of fear.
Mm.
It's the ability to act in spite of fear.
Mm.
To push past those comfort zones, even when you're feeling those anxious feelings.
Yeah, that's such a powerful message. It's not about, waiting until we feel like completely fearless. It's about, recognizing those fears and then, choosing to move forward anyway.
Like we're, like, expanding our comfort zones,
Right.
bit by bit,
Yeah.
by proving to ourselves that we can handle those challenges, even when they trigger those feelings.
Exactly. And each time we do that, we're strengthening those neural pathways of resilience. We're teaching our brains that, we can handle those situations.
So it's like we're building those mental muscles,
Yeah.
one step at a time. Okay, so we've covered a lot of ground in this deep dive, and I feel like I have a much better understanding of, like, how anxiety works in the brain,
Me too.
and more importantly, like, how to actually change those responses.
It's been great exploring this with you, and I think the key takeaway is that anxiety is not the enemy.
Right.
It's part of, being human.
And while it can feel really overwhelming,
Yeah.
it doesn't have to, define us or control our lives.
Yeah.
By understanding it, recognizing those triggers,
Yeah.
and developing those strategies for calming the amygdala and retraining the cortex, we can rewire those responses.
Absolutely. It's about, becoming the conductors of our own minds, learning to, orchestrate those different parts of the brain to work together.
I love that analogy. It's like we're taking back control, becoming the authors of our own stories.
Yeah, exactly.
Well, this deep dive has been, incredible. I'm feeling inspired to start putting these rewiring strategies into practice.
It's been great, diving into this with you. And remember, you're not alone on this journey.
Right.
There are resources, there are therapists, there's, a lot of knowledge out there to support you.
That's really good to hear. So as we wrap up this deep dive, what's, like, the one thing we want our listeners to take away?
I think the most important thing is that, you have the power to change your relationship with anxiety. It's not about erasing it. It's about understanding it, developing those skills, and creating a life that, is aligned with your values.
That's beautifully said. And we've covered a lot, but as always, there's even more to explore. So we'll leave our listeners with this. What are some small, concrete steps they can take today to start putting these strategies into practice?
Yeah, maybe it's, trying that simple breath focused meditation that we talked about, or, going for a walk in nature, even just, noticing those anxiety provoking thoughts without judgment.
Every small step, every every act of courage helps us rewire those anxious brains and create a calmer, more fulfilling life. Thanks for joining us on this deep dive. We'll see you next time.